Good morning, Sunnyvale. We'll get started in just a moment. Happy Friday. Hope everyone's doing well. We'll get started in just a second. This week's early artwork you can see is from my visit to the New York Style Sausage Company, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. You might have seen my post. Actually was a pretty interesting visit as far as that's concerned. You know, it's like I'm always happy when I'm surprised about what's happening in Sunnyvale, and it is truly amazing to see what happens in our city, and so much happens that the mayor and so many other people don't know about. Get started in just a second. Wait for a few more people to show up. Yes, it is. Sunnyvale is relatively calm and quiet. You know, the cherries are still, the last of the cherries are available, and apricots just started showing up. So if you want apricots, you can go see Charlie Olson and go visit the community center. He started setting up his farm stand. Definitely the weather this year has been caused the apricots and the cherries and kind of most of the crops to come in a little bit later, probably about 2 weeks later than usual. Normally they would be selling the apricots mid-June, and we're finally started this week. But definitely happy to see summertime, and summertime in Sunnyvale is always a fantastic thing. But yeah, let me go ahead and remove the wonderful artwork from New York Sausage Style Company. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let me remove my virtual background and go back to my normal office. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thank you for joining me again this week. It's been another busy week. This is the 165th installment of my weekly office hours. Hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy, staying cool. The weather should start to warm up next week. We are now 1,201 days since the March 16, 2020 county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. Over 3 years ago, I converted my weekly coffee shop office hours into these weekly live stream addresses. And, thanks to everyone who continues to join me and drop in, watch them, either live or time delayed. People still say they really appreciate hearing from their mayor each week, whether or not they're watching live or weeks later sometimes. But these weekly live stream addresses allow me to reach more people than just my in-person office hours, but they also give me a chance to provide a wider audience, some updates of what's happening in the city, some preview of upcoming events, and just answer some of your general questions and give you some words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. Most Fridays like today, I'll follow up this live stream session with my in-person meetings at Bean Scene on Murphy Avenue. If you'd like to reserve a 15-minute or 30-minute time slot, just email me at council@larryklein.com. And you can always see my calendar at Larry Klein, www.larryklein.com. And you'll see, all the different events that I'm going to, as well as kind of get some general ideas of what's happening in the city. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last few weeks. Last Tuesday, President Biden was in the Bay Area and announced a $600 million investment for climate resilience projects across the country, $67 million to help build power lines and support, California state's transition to 100% clean electricity. So, Air Force One flew over Sunnyvale on its way to Moffett. He was ultimately in Palo Alto with Governor Newsom and Congressmember Eshoo, kind of highlighting climate resiliency and what's being done from a federal and a state level. So good to have the president. I didn't get a chance to meet him on the tarmac. I'm hoping to have that, that honor sometime soon. And then last Tuesday evening, council met. We started with a closed session, and it was our half-yearly reviews of our city manager and city attorney. And the council has two direct reports: the city manager and the city attorney, and all of city staff, all of city services are managed below their leadership. And so from that standpoint, it's always good to give them a little feedback, but also, give some praise on all the different accomplishments that we've seen just in the last year. So happy to kind of go through that process. And then as far as the main meeting, we approved the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget and resource allocation plan. So this was our first $600 million plus budget. So, ultimately, it was actually, it was really good to see, most of the revenues that have recovered to pre-COVID levels. And then just looking at what projects we're kicking off, what services, definitely we slowly, expand city staff, on specific positions, and then kind of move around resources as needed. But, happy to get certain things across the line. From a budget supplement standpoint, which we had approved a few weeks earlier, this was, additional $1.2 million to catch up on some of the tree trimming that's happened in the city, and getting a lot of our study issues across the line. A lot of times we've been delaying them just because of staff resources and the cost. And, we did much better that way, that we were actually able to kick off additional studies within the city. That evening, we also approved some transportation funds from MTC for the design, actually, for the Poplar sidewalks. This is one of the things that I've been working on for multiple years now. After the 3 students were injured in the crosswalk on El Camino, working with Caltrans, trying to make sure that they're, and they actually listened. I was actually very impressed as far as that's concerned. My advocacy paid off. It was getting them to improve, restriping the crosswalks, changing the walk signals to countdown timers, doing pedestrian lead timing. So the light changes to red, and then the pedestrians get to start out into the intersections before the lanes turn green, so that conceivably cars aren't already just going, and they already see people in the crosswalk if they're going to be people in the crosswalk. So lots of things that got done from that standpoint. But this was to approve the funding for at least the design, and then setting aside a certain amount of money for the actual implementation. And then, we'll go out for grants as we try to look for the actual implementation dollars for that project. So good to see that moving forward. And then last Wednesday, there was an unveiling of the quilt at the Senior Center, and it was in celebration of 30 years of Friends of the Stevens Creek Trail. Need my caffeine. And you'll actually see that on the front of the Sunnyvale Sun today. It was actually a good event. You know, I've been a big supporter and big user of the trail for years and years. You know, I was 6 years on the Planning Commission, and then when I was off the Planning Commission, I actually went and worked on the Citizens Advisory Commission for the 4 cities that were, you know, basically working on the trail alignment. And since I've been on council, you know, especially since I've been mayor, making sure that we're moving the trail extension forward. So Mountain View's working on their section from Dale Heatherstone to Remington, and we're now doing design for Remington to Fremont Avenue. So happy to see, you know, that gem in our community moving forward. But it's been, you know, 30 years that the Friends of the Stevens Creek Trail have been there, and so this was a celebration. So they created a quilt of their trailblazer races every September, and I've run probably about a third of them. Every September there's a trailblazer race, and this quilt kind of highlighted the different logos or the different designs for the shirts that they provided to the participants each year. So if you get a chance, go by the Sunnyvale Senior Center and take a look at that quilt. You know, it's actually nice to see some of the designs. And I was like, oh, I remember I have that shirt and that shirt. It's like, it's actually good to look back from that standpoint. And then last Thursday evening, there was a Pride event on Murphy Avenue. And this was the 3rd annual Pride event, you know, and this was looking for ways to basically celebrate our LGBTQ community, and especially kind of getting people back together post-COVID. So our first one was 2 years ago, which was kind of a small event. It was in you know, collaboration with Silicon Valley Pride and the Office of LGBTQ Affairs from Santa Clara County. The Sunnyvale Art Club did a small presentation the first year, or small exhibit the first year. Now they have the big Pride flag, and so it's actually really cool from that standpoint. You know, one of the pieces, so it's a very colorful piece of a multi-artist effort. I was actually one of the artists to do one of the panels for that, but you know, Assemblymember Evan Lowe showed up. And lots of residents. So, you know, it's like we had over 100 residents downtown for that event. We had music, we had dancing, you know, we had some people, so lots of people dancing to the DJs had some songs playing. And so it was good from that standpoint. And it was, you know, just good to celebrate, you know, Pride and, you know, the inclusivity that's really critical for our community. And it's like, you know, our city is very diverse, and making sure that everyone feels welcome, that everyone feels seen. And ultimately, you know, I did a lot of work to try to make sure that there were a lot of youth there. And I think it really was successful. Probably about a third of the crowd was, you know, maybe more, a third of the crowd, or at least was you know, under 18. So it was actually good to see, you know, that some of the high schoolers there, some of the middle schoolers there, and, you know, lots of families and all that. So thanks to everyone who came out. And for those that missed it, you know, definitely we'll be doing it again next year. I've already heard from people. It's like, oh, I missed it. And you know, this is always so many things happening in the city, and trying to make sure that you know, you get the word out. So we did better this year, and you know, hopefully it'll be even bigger next year. And then last Friday in the morning, there was the law enforcement torch run to benefit Special Olympics in Northern California. And so it went through Sunnyvale. It started at the Arby's parking lot on the west side. So we took the torch from Mountain View and Los Altos police departments, and then we ran on the south side of El Camino to the eastern border, and basically handed it off to the Santa Clara Police Department. And so thanks to everyone who came out and cheered us on. I saw lots of people out there, you know, enjoying the day. Luckily, you know, normally when it went in, and Santa Clara is now hosting the Special Olympics in Northern California. So Santa Clara University. So that actually works out well, because then we're one of the last departments to have the torch, and so we're passing it off in the morning, as opposed to when it was in the when it was elsewhere. I think it was in Sacramento before. We were a few days earlier, and we were always in the afternoon. So running at 2 or 3 o'clock along El Camino Real is not the most fun thing. Ultimately, there's lots of heat emanating from the blacktop, and so it was good to meet a few of the participants who'll be doing the race or did the Olympics last weekend. And it was just good to be out and supporting our public safety department, who's also supporting Special Olympics. So good event from that standpoint. And then Saturday morning was the 9th International Day of Yoga. That was at the Sunnyvale Community Center, and I've been going to that for multiple years now. And celebrating, yoga. I don't do it as much as I'd like to, but it does, I try to do it at least once a week and kind of, recenter myself. And so it was a good event. If you're interested, there's actually, there are yoga classes at the senior center. And so I think they're free yoga classes. Contact the senior center. But we had a good turnout from a class standpoint, and happy to celebrate, yoga and being healthy in our community. And Saturday afternoon, there was a Sunnyvale EV ride and drive event at Baylands Park. Lots of people, I heard, enjoyed. I wasn't able to drop by. I got busy at other events this week. Last weekend was a very busy time, but people, got to test drive an EV as well as an e-bike, and also get a free taco. So I hope for those of you that made it, definitely hope you had a good time. We will have more events like that. We try to have 1 or 2 events like that, each year. Our first one was going to be in the spring, and the next one in the fall. But the first one got rained out, so we'll see when the next one will be. And then on Monday morning, I had a tour of the New York style sausage company. And so it's right there on Tasman and Reamwood, right at the border with Santa Clara. So right next to the creek. And I've been going, so many years ago, my first company in the Bay Area was Rome, IBM, Siemens. And we were going to their restaurant that was attached to the sausage factory, Nicolino's. That was our main happy hour place. So I would go there probably at least once a week, it seems like. But over the time, Nicolino's closed, and the sausage factory kept going. But we highlighted them at the end of May for small business. Small Business Week. So they were one of the companies. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't able to attend that meeting. So I went back. I was attending remotely. So I went back and okay, let me do a tour. And I was shocked about hearing that they're the largest sausage producer on the West Coast. So they produce, lots of sausage under their brand name, as well as some other names, but you can find them at Safeway, you can find them at Costco, you can find them, a lot of different places, and they also sell to certain restaurants and all that. So good to see, good to hear about their story. They produce 200,000 pounds of sausage every week, which was just shocking in my mind. And the FDA approvals, and it was interesting to hear about what the oversight is, how many times the FDA is actually there checking to make sure everything is clean, and it was just spotless. So it was good to hear that, and just to hear about a company that's been in Sunnyvale for about 50 years, but very active at that location and just continuing to expand. So happy to hear about small businesses doing well, and doing manufacturing, producing something in Sunnyvale. So happy to hear about that, and take that tour and meet. We 5 brothers who started it, and meet one of the brothers and kind of the next generation that's taking over. So really cool from that standpoint. And then late on Monday night, Governor Newsom and state lawmakers announced they finally reached a deal for the 2023-2024 budget. And it's actually without touching the state's safety net. And of course, there's a bigger question on whether or not the revenues that are expected will meet the numbers that are projected. You know, there's been lots of discussions on whether or not that's real, but we'll find out in October when the majority of the counties, the people in those counties around the state have to actually finalize their taxes. But it's a $310 billion budget, which includes about $225 billion in general funding spending. It would seek to bridge about $32 billion deficit while maintaining $37 billion in reserves. So they are still keeping reserves, but there was about a $32 billion deficit. And, you know, some of the key measures included in the new budget are increased funding for schools, community colleges, early education and higher education, as well as housing and homeless related expenditures. So, and then of course the negotiated public transit would also receive about $5 billion for capital funding over 3 years, you know, restoring a transit and intercity rail program that Newsom had actually looked at scrapping. So we'll see how it all works out. I haven't had a chance to take a close look at the budget, but, you know, state legislators were hard at work last night to do the final approvals, the final tweaks, and then the governor needs to sign the budget by the end of the day today. So I'm assuming there'll be, you know, a little bit of fanfare somewhere around, somewhere in Sacramento as the governor ends up signing the budget for next fiscal year. And then on Tuesday, council met. We approved the proposed utility increases for utility rate increases for fiscal year 2023-2024. You know, that's for water, wastewater, and solid waste. You know, so it's about a 4% increase in water, a 9% increase in wastewater, and 6% increase for solid waste. But, you know, the typical single-family residential bill will increase by about $10.45. So, you know, the biggest thing when we started going through that is, and, you know, as I've said before, the city doesn't make any money on utilities. It's all the cost of operations, the cost of personnel, delivery of service, and of course, you know, maintaining and, you know, renovating that infrastructure. So that's where that comes. But, you know, the big thing that in looking at comparisons to other cities that are surrounding us, our average bill for residents is $178. That is lower than all the other cities that we're looking at, you know, here in the Bay Area. Most of them, or all of them, are above $200. We came in about $179 for an average cost of water, wastewater, and you know, water, wastewater, and solid waste collection. And so, you know, it's actually good to see that you know, why we streamline a lot of that. We make sure that we, you know, deal with the reserves, and it's just being a well-run city that we're not, you know, we're doing our best to try to make sure that the cost of doing business is cheaper than others. So happy about that from that standpoint. And then we also on Tuesday approved establishing citywide objective design standards for multifamily residential and mixed use development. So we spent a good part of the meeting talking about that. And, you know, I was on the planning commission for more than 9 years. So it was good to be able to get to apply some of those lessons learned to those general guidelines. You know, I think that's the critical thing is Sunnyvale is very good about making guidelines to make it easier for developers to understand what's expected from a city, what's expected from a good project, what makes a good project, and make it easier to get it approved. So codifying that, codifying those descriptions, what's the parking requirements, there are certain things that have been added that, like making sure that a multifamily development, over like 10 units has a reserved space for moving day, as opposed to, I've seen projects where people are expected to be out in the streets, and blocking traffic while they have their moving van there. And so it's all those sorts of things that make a project better, whether or not it's permeable pavers or lighting or all that. So I think, it was really good to utilize some of those planning commission skills that I don't get to use as often now that I'm on council, and especially as mayor. And then last night I was up in San Francisco for the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And for those of you that were alive, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was signed in April of 1998, 25 years. And so that ended most of the violence, the troubles and kind of the ethno-nationalist conflict in Northern Ireland that had prevailed since the 1960s. So it was a major development in Northern Ireland's peace process, and it was good to have some of the people that had went through that process and hear their stories. See lots of photos. I've been trying to meet with the Irish consul for a while now, and it was finally good to meet with him and get him sometime soon to come down to Sunnyvale. So they have an Irish consulate up in San Francisco, but to tell him the story of Martin Murphy Jr., who was born in Wexford County, Ireland, who came to the U.S., came to Sunnyvale and was one of the biggest landowners, one of the biggest, kind of notable people in the 1800 or in the 1900s in the 1800s in California, and telling the consul about Martin Murphy Avenue and that historic place which still exists today. So ultimately, I think I'll be able to get him to come down and grab a pint and visit our fantastic gem of Murphy Avenue. So good to finally be able to meet him and do kind of get the word out on what Sunnyvale is doing. As I said previously, I won't be covering weekly COVID numbers unless things change dramatically, but I continue to spend lots of time advocating on our city's behalf at the county, at the state level, at the federal level. Lots of partners and looking at trying to get a lot more things done here in Sunnyvale. Let me go ahead and announce some of the upcoming events. Lots of events coming up this summer. July is Parks and Recreation Month. We actually did a special order of the day at last Tuesday's meeting. There are lots of events that are happening around the city. There's a whole activities play card that people can fill out and do online or drop by the library to find out more information. But lots of events going on all around the city. There will be raffles to give things away for those people that fill out their play card. And then, of course, tomorrow is the Stars and Strides run in downtown San Jose. You can still sign up. If you sign up today, you can pick up your shirt at Sports Basement in Sunnyvale. And if you pick up your shirt, you actually get a discount for buying things at Sports Basement Sunnyvale. So yeah, so that will kick off at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So it's an early rise and to get down to San Jose, but happy to support that for multiple years now. I always look for events, and the event the basically raises funds for healthcare and Valley Medical. So it is really critical to celebrate our healthcare workers and raise some funds for them as far as that's concerned. And then on midday tomorrow, Cup and Cone will be having their grand opening. It's a new ice cream store on Mary Avenue, right next to Zanato's, right next to Gurkha's Kitchen. So they'll be having their grand opening celebration at noon, but ultimately they have specials all day. So if you can go buy cup and cone in Zanato's Plaza there, you can attend. You can attend the ribbon cutting or a special celebration at noon, but drop by all day and welcome them to Sunnyvale. They had a small location across from Fremont High School, but this is more of a restaurant location. So looks fantastic inside. So happy to have that. And then the week after Independence Day, live music in downtown Sunnyvale starts back up. So the summer music series will be happening every Wednesday from July 12th through August 24th. And that'll be, rock music pretty much, rock and popular music. And then jazz and beyond starts every Saturday from July 15th through August 26th. So that'll happen every Saturday night. So lots of things happening around the city, around Sunnyvale in general, and around, the Bay Area. It's always good. It's always good to be out. As far as upcoming council meetings, our next council meeting is Tuesday, July 11th, and we'll finally be looking at approving multiple actions related to the Moffett Park specific plan. So we've been working on this for multiple years now, but it's looking at adding 10 million square foot of office space, 20,000 units of housing, and 500,000 square foot of retail in Moffett Park. But it's also making it walkable, making it bikeable, kind of changing, creating open space, kind of changing the vision of not just an industrial park, but a walkable, livable area. So happy to see that finally come in front of us. Let me go ahead and get to the weekly questions. If you have a question, please add it to the comments and I'll try to get to it. Multiple questions this week. Kevin and Linda asked, why are there so many loud jets in Moffett Field last weekend? So I checked with Moffett. It was, a military training exercise that included taking off, returning to refuel, and then taking off again. And so it was 8 F-35s, which is actually an unusually high number of fighters in one weekend. And, the F-35s are replacing the F-18s that used to frequent Moffett a lot more. The F-35 is a single engine jet. And so it actually makes it a lot louder, even at slower speeds. So, hopefully that's quieted down for a while now. And that's part of, the flight allocations that, as NASA took over Moffett Field, there's a whole lease agreement, but those military flight allocations are standard, and they're way below the number of flights going in and out of Moffett are way below what is approved for that airport. And we have noise monitoring locations around the city for airplane noise, and I haven't been able to check that, but I'm sure they were off the charts as far as those the F-35s going through. So yes, I know it's part of the city, but they've been here for years, and it's also important for military training, for what they're doing on the West Coast. Susan asked last week, what was up with you in the photo of the balloon hat? And I was Viking for the day, at one of the block parties. They had somebody creating balloon animals and balloon art. So I was Viking for a day. And people enjoy it. I always look at the mayor as a prop at some time. If I'm out to enjoy whatever you want me to do. And so happy to take part in that event. The kids loved, the mayor was making fun of himself dressing up as a Viking. So I loved it from that standpoint. But if your neighborhood is having a block party, reach out. It's like I'll try to come by. That's one of the important things of being mayor is being out in the community as much as possible. Julia asked, when is the Las Palmas water feature going to be refilled? You know, the water restrictions have ended. Please add beauty back into our parks. So, you know, I talked to city staff about this last month, and yes, all the water features are being filled. You know, we restarted our splash pads back in April at several of the parks, and I think we refilled Braley and Sarah Parks water features in the last week. But we should be refilling Las Palmas sometime in the next week or so. They actually found some issues with the seals on kind of the big water pond that's part of Las Palmas Park, and so they've had to do some repairs and finding some issues with the equipment that hadn't been used for a few years since since we've been in drought for several years. So definitely that should be returning soon, but you know, I heard Braley and I think Sarah has already been refilled, but that is our goal to add those water features back in as much as possible to our different parks. Let's see. Jennifer asked, is there anything you can do to stop people setting off fireworks? Pets and people can really be scared and triggered by the noise. What can we do? So public, you know, you definitely utilize the public non-emergency number. It's your best option. You know, as a reminder, do not call 911 to report fireworks. You know, 911 is for life-threatening emergencies. To report fireworks, just call our non-emergency number 408-730-7180. And, you know, don't call if you're just hearing fireworks. You know, in order to help dispatch, you really need to provide dispatch officers with an actual location of an incident. So if you're seeing people setting off fireworks in the street or something, definitely that's what you should be. You know, it's, you know, I understand many people aren't following the no fireworks law and how frustrating it can be. You know, I have pets, and I've had pets that have been, you know, definitely freaked out by the sound of fireworks. You know, and besides causing, you know, serious injuries, that stressing of pets is one of the big things. And then stressing out, you know, veterans and people that have been through traumatic experiences. So, you know, fireworks are extremely dangerous. We have had a wet spring, but still, you know, it could land on rooftops, and, you know, there's tons of issues as far as that's concerned. Chris asked, is there anything interesting going on in the city for July 4th? So no, you know, it's a relatively calm day in Sunnyvale. There will be a red, white, and blue parade on July 4th in San Jose. So if you're interested in going to that, I know that Assembly Member Evan Lowe is invited me. You know, Supervisor Ellenberg invited me. So happy to attend that. There's also a veterans picnic in Alviso. So if you're a veteran, if you're a family of veterans, definitely consider that. Gary asked, Sunnyvale doesn't allow fireworks. Where can my family go to see them? So several local cities. So Cupertino has an Independence Day at their Quinlan Community Center with fireworks in the evening. Shoreline Amphitheater, as well as Great America, also have fireworks scheduled for those evenings of July 4th. So if you want to see fireworks, there are places here in the Bay Area that you can go see them. Johan asked, wondering if you have any insight on what's going into the old Wendy's building on Matilda. So it is planned to be a Taco Bell. So renovations are underway. If you go by there, you can see that they've already started that, you know, deconstruction of the facade, but ultimately it will be a Taco Bell at that old Wendy's location. Judy asked, when does the summer music start? So yeah, currently there's a DJ playing, you know, Wednesday and Thursday nights on downtown, but the Wednesday rock and the Saturday jazz start the week after July 4th downtown. So you know, July 4th is, of course, on next Wednesday. Wait, next Tuesday, next Wednesday, and ultimately, the music will be starting the week after that. So definitely lots of things happening. Yeah, July 4th is Tuesday, but they wanted to hold off for not to start it off on a week when a lot of people will be on vacation. Susan asked, I saw your post about the utility box art. Where is it going? So it's phase 2 of our, so phase 1 was 12 locations downtown. Phase 2 is 16 locations spread across the city. And, I met several artists last week. So the birds playing tennis next to the tennis center, the fish that's right there next to the red ribbons on Maud and Matilda. So you can see them across the city. And I posted earlier this week about the 16 locations and a kind of a map as far as that's concerned and where you can see them. Joan asked, what is the timeline for the walking paths and the outdoor amphitheater to completed by the new Civic Center on Matilda? Will be in 2023. So it was supposed to be by mid-September in time for State of the City, but PG&E had major delays on disconnecting power. But PG&E finally arrived this week after lots of advocacy, after lots of, trying to convince them that this is a high priority project. But so they arrived Monday morning. I was happy to be running by when I saw the PG&E trucks out there to disconnect power, gas and electricity from the old buildings. So hopefully we'll be able to get that on track. Last I heard that depending upon when PG&E completed, we would not be able to officially open all the grounds until the end of October. But hopefully now that they've actually completed, we can get a better timetable in and get things back on track. Let's see if we have any other questions. Can you tell us about your cooperation with the Valley Water District regarding the unhoused? So I've been working with Valley Water to try to get them to do more community outreach. This is one of the big things that from a city standpoint, we've been working with unhoused encampments and providing the option of shelter beds that we work with Home First on. I've been, finally with advocacy, it looks like Valley Water is finally starting that similar program. So it's like the county, so we pay Home First to do community outreach, as well as looking at offering shelter beds to some of the unhoused. So it's like if they're causing issues in certain areas, it's like, okay, you need to move, or take this shelter bed or move if they're causing specific issues. I've been, talking to Valley Water that should be their model for the encampments that are on Valley Water land. And so they finally set aside money earlier this year, and part of their fiscal year budget, they'll actually be doing something similar. So happy that they can actually take more of an active stance on what they're doing with the unhoused along their property. Is there any plan to give some relief on utility charges from Sunnyvale? For example, could homes that plant native plants get a reduced rate compared with lawns? So the problem is, it's like for service, and there are laws about being fair, and definitely there are for utility, there are lots of programs to convert. Valley Water has lots of programs to make it cheaper, that you're not to pay for converting your lawns into native plants. So they will help you do that to reduce your water usage. From a rate standpoint, it's all based upon usage, and there's laws in there about being fair on usage to a large degree, that it's like, okay, we're covering our rate of the rate. So if we charge you less, then we need to charge somebody else more. And there's an equality thing. You know, so I've had these discussions. You know, we've had seniors saying, oh, we should do reduced rates for seniors on this and that. You should only pick up the garbage once, you know, every 2 weeks for seniors. You know, that's why we do different rates, different size bins and all that. We also have programs that you know, the city does. We work with Sunnyvale Community Services. If seniors have issues paying their bills, Sunnyvale Community Services has funding to help, you know, pay them. And also, it's like, as opposed to turning off, you know, the power or something of that nature, we will have payment plans and from a city standpoint. So it is really important that, you know, we're empathetic from that standpoint. But reducing water, I think the biggest thing is to help pay for how you can reduce water. George asked, perhaps the large piles of dirt near the city center construction site could benefit with seeding flowers to minimize blowing dust and improve the appearance. So, you know, those piles of dirt are there to fill in the basements for the city hall and the city hall annex once they're torn down. The good thing is, now that the power is off, they will be torn down very quickly, and we'll be filling in those basements. So no issue to seed at this point. No, you know, I know that there's been a little bit of blow during the winds, but it hasn't been, you know, it hasn't been bad as far as I've heard. Haven't been a big issue, but definitely, you know, they've done some covering with tarps and all that, but that should be going away relatively quickly now that power is finally being disconnected from City Hall, or from the old City Hall and the old City Hall annex. That looks like all the questions that I at least have right now. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. You know, we live in interesting times. New issues come up almost every day. But I want you to know that no matter what the challenges we face them together. I'm proud of Sunnyvale and how residents have responded over the last few years. You know, I'm thankful to everyone who helps out in our community, you know, volunteering, showing their generosity, showing their kindness. Your actions and your attitude really do make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. Enjoy July 4th. Enjoy the warm weather. Definitely stay cool next week. Take care. Goodbye.